Good evening. This is the Wednesday, March 5th, 2014 meeting of the Finance Committee. It's 7 o'clock. Our agenda tonight, call to order at 7 o'clock. We've got a review of two large budgets tonight, the Fire Department and the Department of Public Works. We have one transfer, I believe, to take care of this evening, and we'll get ourselves teed up for our next meeting, and then we'll adjourn. So a short agenda, but some important departments to review here. Our first department up would be the Fire Department. Chief Coleman is here. Chief, I know this is still sort of the start of the process. We've been asking all department heads to make a presentation to a greater or lesser length. In your case, lesser length, but, you know, I know it's all filled with good numbers. So, microphone's yours.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, members of the Finance Committee. So before you this evening for the FY15 Fire Department budget, with the exception of contractual obligations that were negotiated by town administration, the bulk of my budget, probably the remainder of the budget, remains level funded. Again, with the exception of those contractual obligations. There was one item that was submitted in the original budget proposal, which was not moved forward as a recommendation of the town manager, and that was the addition of 4 additional full-time firefighters to the department. As you have heard me stand here before and tell you over the last couple of years, it is my ultimate goal to get the minimum staffing of the department from 6 to 7. We still run about a third of the calendar year at our minimum of 6. So again, it's certainly a goal of mine to raise that number so we can not only put an additional person on the fire engine, but again, the day is so fluid that body also could potentially be the on-duty supervisor who's forced to a role that we may not necessarily want them in. It's not really the best use of that supervisor in the course of the day. So that was removed. I do understand the situation. I guess my request to the Finance Committee this evening, and both Ed and Julie are aware of this request. If, when everything shakes out as we near town meeting or as we near July 1, even if funding was available to add one position to the department, that would be extremely beneficial in terms of reducing some of the overtime. I'm not going to get into the complexity of the shift. You've heard that before, and we certainly don't have enough time to do that tonight. But as you know, the complexity of the department and the schedule is great. Group 4, which is a permanent Tuesday, Thursday shift. When you look at shift coverage overtime over the course of a year, 30% of the shift coverage overtime is on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Just by the way the rotation falls, the number of paramedics that are assigned to that shift. So typically on a Tuesday or a Thursday, there's only 2 paramedics scheduled. So when one paramedic requests a day off, it's an automatic trigger for paramedic only overtime on that Tuesday or Thursday. So even if the Finance Committee and town administration could find their way to support one position, it would be my intent to move them to that Group 4 spot to reduce some of the burden, at least 30% of the overtime burden that we have in terms of that medic-only overtime. Other than that, Mr. Chairman, the budget is, again, pretty straightforward. It's contractual obligations and level funded, so I'll certainly entertain any questions that the committee may have.
Great. Thanks, Chief. And not to minimize it, but we know that your funding requests haven't changed. Therefore, past discussions to the shortfall certainly we know haven't changed. If anything else, I'm sure they've increased some pressure on the department budget. I'll open up for questions from the board. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, ambulance receipts, is that in this package where we are for?
I'm not sure if it's been supplied to you.
Bottom of the page. Page 1, bottom line.
I just dropped something, don't worry about it.
So is this part of the, I mean, is this the business plan that was built into the original program? How much, is that still funding the ambulance receipts, that money we take in for our ambulance? Is that,
Go ahead.
is that funding the anticipated, the initial amount of in your business plan, the number of firefighters?
Yes.
No.
The-
Is it able to- I'm sorry, are we able to sustain additional through the business plan, or is it?
Yeah, no, the business plan is flattened out, and that's a good question. In fiscal 13, the total ambulance collected receipts was $773,000, $138, so $773,138. Not much has changed in terms of the situation from last year, in terms of the amount of ambulance receipts collected is a direct result of cuts to Medicare. There's been, over the years, there's been a 7% reduction in Medicare. If you add 7% onto that number, that's the $850,000 that we were collecting, 3 years ago. So our collection rate for the ambulance has maintained steady. We have over a 90% collection rate. The reason that there is a reduction in the receipts, again, is a direct result of Medicare. The current receipts that we get is funding the 10 positions and the capital that the business plan said it would do 5 years ago. So that is funding that. But one thing that I would just, caution the Finance Committee and just remind town administration that when that business plan was presented 9 years ago, it was for a 5-year projection. We're well beyond that 5-year projection. So I know the business plan is talked about. I reference it on occasion. But we did meet the target numbers that were projected in that business plan. But at this point, we're coming up on that business plan is about 5 years old in terms of the projection that it did. But the short answer to the question is, the current ambulance receipts that we are funding what the business plan said it would fund.
So it can sustain it?
Yes.
All right, one more question. You mentioned that Tuesday, Thursday shift, if someone calls in, why does it kick in automatic mandatory overtime? Is that a policy, or is that contract?
No, it does not kick in mandatory overtime. Our normal shift staffing is 8. We have the ability to drop by 2, so our minimum staffing is 6. But with the shift rotation, the way that it works, groups 1, 2, and 3 rotate throughout the week. Group 4 is a permanent Tuesday, Thursday with only 4 members on it. So the way that the groups are divided up, on a Tuesday or a Thursday, we find ourselves in oftentimes where there's only 2 paramedics scheduled. We require 2 paramedics to be on duty. So if we're in a situation where we're already running at minimum staffing or close to minimum staffing, and a paramedic requests a day off or takes a sick day, whatever the case may be, it triggers mandatory paramedic overtime in order to maintain us at 2 paramedics. So when you look at the ebb and flow of the schedule over the course of the year, Tuesdays and Thursdays are always problematic just by virtue of the way the shifts rotate and the way that just the people are off. On a normal day, maybe possibly a Wednesday on a Group 2 day, we may have 4 paramedics on duty. But on a Tuesday, Thursday with the rotation, we always have less paramedics on Tuesday and Thursday than any other day.
Thank you.
I'll say, Chris. Kim?
Steve, can you tell me how much one firefighter costs?
Yep. I can give you the salary. Mr. Kazanovich would have to help with the benefits.
Yeah, I'm just looking for the salary number.
Yeah,
right?
about $55,000.
And you said about 30% of the overtime is taken up by the need for assistance on that Group 4 shift?
When you look at, and we break our overtime up into many different categories. So we know the percentages of what overtime is spent by sick days, what is spent by training, however we're spending overtime dollars, we track individual categories how it's spent. When we talk about overtime for shift coverage, and I have 7 days a week in front of me, 15% of 15% on Tuesdays, 15% on Thursdays. So it's a total of 30% of our overtime that we spend for shift coverage is on those 2 days.
Okay.
The other days of the week, they're around 7 or 8%.
So what percentage of your overtime budget do you spend on shift coverage?
It's about half, a little more than half. The rest of it is training. Actually, I'm sorry, it's probably about 60%. 40% goes for training.
So, say 65,000 is for shift coverage of your 126,
Correct.
roughly.
Yes.
And 30% of that, 18. So in the $20,000 range, could you reduce your overtime by that amount if there was a way to fund a position?
In theory, yes, but one of the problems that we do have is that in the fire suppression line, although this year we've been doing well in the fire suppression line only because I have people on leave of absence and things like that, so we haven't been taxing that. On a normal year, when everybody's working on the call firefighter side, normally that is underfunded. So I typically I usually do a transfer out of fire suppression into career overtime in order to cover that. So I think I know where you're saying, whereas if we were to take that $20,000, could that go towards funding a position? Sometimes that's used to cover shortfalls in other areas of the budget.
So where you're going with this, Kim, is your net increase to add a firefighter that's paramedic, we'll say, is instead of, would you start with 55 grand on a salary?
Yep.
Is probably something closer to the low 40s on a net basis between the overtime account and the firefighter account. It's just good for us to know in terms of a net basis. I know the math and the science doesn't work exactly on that, but it's good to make that clear. Kim, very good question. And anything else?
Are we going to talk capital at all?
Yeah, we'll certainly talk capital. Let's do that after we do the
Okay.
operating budget.
All right.
If that's okay with you, Chief, we'll keep you under the lights for that, too.
No problem.
And Kim, if you have any follow-up questions, feel
Okay,
free. Ed?
that's fine.
Chief, on the issue with the overtime on the Tuesdays and Thursdays, is that more because those are the days that we typically have fewer calls on average? Is that why the shift is set up so those 2 days are more likely to have a need for overtime?
No, the shift schedule is not set up based on a schematic of volume during the day. I mean, when you average it out, the volume stays steady, It falls short with the way that the shift schedule rotates. Again, it's 4 working groups. 3 groups rotate over the course of a month. Group 4 is a permanently assigned Tuesday, Thursday shift. So 3 of the groups have 8 members assigned. Group 4 only has 4 members assigned. So then there's an A and a B side for the Tuesday, Thursday. So on any given Tuesday, it's group 4 and then half of another working group. So it has more to do with the dynamic of how the groups are built and the number of paramedics assigned to each group. There are some Tuesdays and Thursdays where it's not an issue if one group has an additional paramedic on it. But if it's a group that has the minimum number of paramedics, then that's potentially a problem on Tuesday or Thursday when there's a paramedic.
So you do the best you can in terms of trying to balance all the staff and cover all the...
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, we would have the same number of paramedics on each group and it would rotate seamlessly, but that's not the case. Each group has it doesn't have an even number of paramedics on the group.
All set, Ed? Okay. Jimmy?
Mr. Chairman, through you, I still have a question about how you do your minimum. I Now, you were saying you schedule 8, and you can go down to 6 without actually using overtime, so it's a 6 minimum. If you have these extra people and you have a policy of 7 as your minimum, are you still using that same 8, or are you actually going up to 9?
Each group right now, if I was to get if I was funded the full request of the 4 people, it would bring each group from 8 to 9.
Okay, so you'd have 9 with the 2.
Right, still allowing the same 2 off, just raising my minimum from 6 to 7.
Does that cause you any increase in overtime just by the basis of saying that you're increasing your minimum? Would that cause more overtime because you're bringing your minimum up?
No, because the salary would then be fixed. We're going from 8 to 9, still only allowing 2 off. Essentially, you're spending the same dollars as you are today because you're still only allowing 2 off. It would increase the overtime if I were to allow 3 off at a time.
Okay.
Then it would increase the overtime. But by leaving only 2 off at a time, it doesn't raise the overtime dollar.
Well, you would make a policy stating that 7 is now the minimum.
Correct.
Abide by that.
Right.
The other question I have is, on the ambulance proceeds, I'm looking at the figures down there, and department request was $385,000, but the recommendation of town management was $169. I'm just trying to understand why there's a difference there, and what was the discussion involved with that.
Your question is, what is the difference between the 385 and the 169?
Correct.
That's the 4 positions.
That is the 4 positions. So you're just going to offset those 4 positions with ambulance proceeds?
The spreadsheet is set up a little differently. You can't, I know what you're doing. You're looking at ambulance proceeds and then going over to the right. It's actually, one has nothing to do with the other.
I was just wondering why one request was for 385 and then town management came back with 169 as an offset.
It has nothing to forget about the ambulance proceeds.
Okay.
My total request was an increase of 385.
Okay.
Town management total request was an increase of 160.
Oh, okay, I got it.
That's the difference of the 4 positions.
Okay, got it. The only other question I have is, we talk about this every year, equipment repair. Looking at the 3-year average, which we talk about this every single year. It seems this year, do we know what we've spent? I mean, I've got a sheet, but it's
Well,
probably...
I actually have, and I know you love to bring this up every year, actually, I have good news for you.
Well, it looked good from what I had before, so I was wondering if it comes up.
It's always been my goal to bring you good news. The reality is the upstart of the fleet maintenance within the DPW has had very positive results, I think, for all departments across the board. We are currently, and as you recall, my total operating budget for equipment repair was $75,000. Last fiscal year, 50 of that was shifted to the DPW in a line item reserved for the fire department. When I ran the mid-year budget numbers on January 1, the line item in the DPW was under 50% spent as of January 1. I remained $25,000 in my budget for repairs that was sort of outside of the scope of the DPW. As of today, we're almost 3/4 of the year through. I'm still under 50% spent in my repair side.
Okay, well, that's good.
Now, that is not to say that we had our pumps tested a few months ago. We do have some issues with some of our fire pumps. We actually had those companies in today making some of those repairs. They had to order some of the parts. There's one truck that I'm actually anticipating a fairly large repair. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to cover that repair within the existing budget between what I have in my light item and what the DPW has in theirs. But this is the first year since I've been in office for 8 years, and this is the first year that I have not been before you before March looking for a transfer into the equipment repair line. And this is the first year that when you separate out, granted we're doing it differently this year, but when I look at my line and the DPW line, that they're under 50% spent. And that is a direct result of the work of the DPW and everything that we've been able to pull.
Well, that's excellent. Obviously with the sophistication of the equipment, it doesn't take too much to get to eat up 25. So we'll keep our fingers crossed and hope that continues. But yeah, that is good news. And the 25,000 always makes me nervous. We always, clear the budget and cross our fingers and hope everything works out. But I think that's all I got.
Okay, and just one quick question to Ed, and then we'll get to Ann on this. Fiscal 14 is the first year that fleet maintenance really had taken over these accounts. So next year, I know we're comparing to a fiscal 14 appropriation. Next year's the first year we'll really see actuals based on what fleet maintenance has done for other departments and divisions, correct? Okay, Ann, questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask about the equipment repair too, so I'm glad to hear the good news. I just wanted to comment, we have a 90% collection rate, is that what you said on the ambulance account? So that must be very good, considering, I'm sure it's probably above industry average. So I just wanted to make a comment that that's a very good number, even though the proceeds are down from what we've seen before. I mean, you know why, because of the Medicare. So it's still a positive for the town. Thank you.
It is. And thank you for those comments. And again, like I said last year, and I'll reiterate this year, that this isn't a problem that's unique to Auburn. This is a nationwide problem. This is taking over most of the commentary in trade journals nationwide. And like I said, when you look at, since the fire rescue department took over the ambulance 8 years ago, we've always maintained over a 90% collection rate. We've always maintained in the ballpark of what we collect. And like I mentioned earlier, with the 7% reduction in Medicare, when you have the 7% on top of what we collected in 13, we're right in the ballpark of where we've been for the last 8 years. I don't know where it's going in the future. It is an unfortunate situation. But I think that even though we have seen, that slight downward trend in emergencies, I can't stress enough that outside the dollars and cents, and you know this firsthand, Ms. Kavanaugh, you sat on that committee, the benefit to the town operating this service, where we have 100% control over the operation, its employees, and how emergency medical services is delivered to the community. Although it's easy to put a price tag on it, sometimes you have to look beyond it. Like I said, we're $773,000 to put towards the budget to offset this operation. There's nothing to shake a stick at. It's still a good amount of money. We provide an outstanding service to the community, and there is value in the town operating that service.
Thank you.
Chief, I couldn't agree more in terms of that. You can't put a price on the full scope of what that service does for the town. Just a couple of quick questions from me on this. The building maintenance and supplies account is, for the second year now, budgeted down quite a bit. Is that a reasonable amount in your estimation? I know you left it flat funded.
Yes. I can tell you that I will be before you at some time before the end of the fiscal year looking for some transfers in those line items. I did have a meeting with town administration relative to the account. And I've explained this in the past. We have 2 stations. When you split it up, it's essentially $10,000 per building. I can stand here right now and tell you that I have approximately $90,000 worth of repairs that need to be done today.
I saw your report on that.
For the West Street station.
Right.
And we haven't even talked about headquarters yet. So The reality is fire headquarters is 50 years old, Station 2 is over 60 years old. Some of the challenges that we face at West Street, as you all know, the building wasn't designed to be a fire station in the first place. So the apparatus sits on what was the old elementary school cafeteria.
What's a school there? Don't make fun of
It's undersized. Right now, we have a very severe roof leak in the building. There's a hole that's about 2 feet around, two holes about 2 feet around coming from the ceiling. I had to buy a cover to put on the boat inside the station to protect the boat from damage from the roof leak. And the water comes out of the ceiling and it just captures in that boat cover and it fills the boat up with water. So the buildings are in need of some repair. The other thing that I would point out to the Finance Committee is that when you look at the capital improvement plan for the fire department, whether it's a 5-year plan or 20 years, there is not one building-related capital improvement on that plan. And that's not because I'm ignoring it. That's because the money that each department is allocated for capital, 100% of my allocation is committed to lease purchases for fleet. So it unfortunately doesn't leave any additional monies for capital improvements. So, Mr. Chairman, ultimately what happens is over the course of a year, I try to, outside of the normal wear and tear and the things that break, I try to accomplish some of these smaller capital purchases that we can kind of undertake within the operating budget. I have spoken with Mr. Kazanovich. Again, we've had some issues because that's not right word. On January 1, I had 16 call firefighters. I had some move out of town, some take leave of absences, so we have some money in the fire suppression line that was not utilized because those positions have been vacant for a while. So I did speak with Mr. Kazanovich about, at some point, coming up with a list, bringing it to the Finance Committee to get approval to transfer some of the excess money that I would have in my budget to begin to tackle some of these capital issues between the two stations. Again, the reality is with a 50 and a 60-year-old building, $10,000 per building is not going to be enough to maintain. The reality is I was over 50% spent in that line item before the so unfortunately, it is a line item that's underfunded, but I do try to make do and do my best where I can have some gains in other line items throughout the year.
If I may, sure. And the chief raises some very interesting points here. I think if you look at the list he prepared, that has a total of about $91,000 and change. I would say approximately half of those items would not even fit into the capital improvement plan because it has a value of less than $5,000. So we're trying to find a way to address some of these requests, either through one-time revenue sources that we can bring at a fall or a special town meeting and address it as a one-time appropriation and not something we're going to build in as a recurring expense that we have to cover on an annual basis through permanent revenue. So we continue to look at ways to fund some of this. We're actually going through our prior year's CIP. Those items that may have balances in them, we could then amend and apply towards some of the need that he's identified here. So it is important. I think at the same time, we have to consider what we want to do with our public safety buildings as well. Is this something we want to put money into? If in fact, a little further down the road, we may consider a new public safety complex, whether it be joint or individual. A lot of moving parts here, but certainly I think the chief wants to keep this on the radar screen. Just to let you know, town administration's position, we do recognize it. It is considered part of a priority list. At what point, when things do loosen up, our money that does become available, this is one area that we will look at as a one-time, if we can work it into the annual budget.
Yeah, I guess my only concern, and then Chris will get to you on that, is, I guess, the timing. Obviously, some of these, I want to call them fixes, and I know that's an unfair statement, to some of the smaller items on there. Should they really need to be waiting until a fall town meeting for funding to be available? I mean, it would seem to me that if we get some positive news by June, that if there's a way to fund those sooner, we'd be crazy to wait, just in terms of public facilities.
Well, I think the chief has identified potentially some flexibility within his own current year operating budget.
Right.
I think he alluded to that. We'd probably like to get a little further on down the road before a request to transfer money from the suppression account to address some of these items. Certainly, we would support that. He has done it in years past to address some other items. So here we are in March. I would say the chief would feel more comfortable maybe another 30 days down the road, he may be considering a transfer at that
And
point.
that's fine. I appreciate the level of detail you've provided, which you always do, but it's nice to have this stuff memorialized, even though it's not on the front page of the budget at this point in time. Chris, I've got one more quick question for the chief, and then we'll get over to you. The other account that I saw that either looked, well, let's just say down-funded, I know that's not a real word, is new equipment, is budgeted significantly less than your 3-year trend on that. Is there something with that?
Just so I'm clear, Mr. Chairman, are you looking at the 15 budget or current accounts in 14?
I'm looking at the 16,000 that was budgeted for new equipment for 15 and 16. I probably asked the question last year, and it just slips my mind. You've been running at about 23, 24 grand per year, so I just...
Yeah, I guess I just want to clarify to make sure I'm answering your question.
Sure.
I think I understood you. You're looking at 15's request of 16. Are you asking me if I think that's sufficient?
Exactly.
The reality is we have a list of equipment that we try to replace on a rotation every year with percentage hikes of what the vendors are doing. We're able to kind of replace less and less. I think that line item could stand to be a little larger, especially as we're going to start coming into, and again, some of these things I try to handle through transfers, because, what I would really need in this line item, I know what the answer would be. So some of these things I tried to deal with throughout the year, and as you can remember, last year I came to you with a request to transfer money to replace hose. We had aging hose that was over 20 years old. It's something that was targeted for the new equipment, but by the time it rolled around to be replaced, we didn't have enough of new equipment to do it, so it required a transfer. Unfortunately, the new equipment line is really, the way that I envision the equipment line is, it's to replace things on a schedule when we need them. Unfortunately, what the line has really become is, as we go through the course of the year and we use something and it breaks, or maybe a new piece of technology comes out and we say, geez, you know what, we really could use that today. But it's really almost become, we break a piece of equipment and we have to replace it, so it comes out of new equipment. So it really, I don't want to call it a repair line, because that's not what it is. It's replacing things that are damaged. But I would really like to be utilizing it in the fashion that we're purchasing new equipment on a replacement schedule versus replacing things that just break a little.
Yeah, we just haven't got ahead of the curve yet at this point in time. Okay, thanks, Chief. Chris, I think you had a question?
I actually have a point and a question, and Chief, I think you manage your budget exceedingly well. I've been impressed this year. You do a great job with what you do, but what I'm looking for, speaking as a town meeting member, as a taxpayer and from this board, I need to know that you have a hole in your roof. I need to see this on paper. I need to see it in your CIP budget. I need you to advocate for those types of things. Whether you get it is not, but for me, listening tonight that hearing you have a hole in your roof, these things that we need to know. We need to put them on paper. Can we have meetings with the school department and other boards, and we hear about their plans, their things? I'd like to know that we need to fix your building too. I didn't know about that tonight, so I need you and other department heads to put this information on paper and advocate for it. You might not get it, but we need to know, we as a board need to know the entire picture. And that's just my own personal opinion, because I just need to know that. So when we're hearing everything else, we can, in the back of my head, know, okay, wait a minute, there's a hole that needs to be fixed. I just wish I would have known that ahead of time, and it should be in your CIP, even if it's a request, it's not approved, but I still think we should know as a board the full picture. And so I really want you to step up and advocate on your behalf. Don't be afraid to ask for whatever it is. I know you work with Ed, but from speaking for me, advocate. You might not get it, but that's your job. Sorry, and this is my own opinion.
Well, no,
and I want you to do that.
I appreciate the comments, but I think I am doing it.
Okay. My point is the roof. I just wish it was in some sort of a CIP plan or something that we could have. Is it?
To speak to the roof specifically, we can talk about the CIP on the fire department.
Yeah.
When the hole in the roof came, town administration was notified. I've heard some of you up there already say that you were aware of it. So you have something. You must have the letter that I submitted to town administration. So it was reported. It's not that I'm not willing to share the information.
No, I'm not saying that. I just want people to be more forthcoming with information. So so when we do make recommendations, we have all the information. And
I don't disagree. I guess the problem that I have, the situation that I'm in, is that when we put the CIP together, when we put it forward, the reality is there's not enough dollars to go around. So I don't know, I can't speak to why it doesn't make it on the CIP plan. The building-related issues, I can't speak to that. When I go through the CIP, the only thing that's really reviewed on an annual basis is the vehicle leases, which chews up all the CIP money, and then it's really, the conversation's really over. There's no mechanism to put those requests forward other than in a letter saying this is what my problems are. They don't, at least for the fire department, they don't sit anywhere on a capital side. I would be more than happy to work with the town administration to memorialize those in the CIP, but that just hasn't happened.
You're gonna hate me, but one more thing. Because the board that approves all this stuff is town meeting. I mean, I know we go back and forth with recommendations from us and everything, but that's just, and one more thing, and I'll step back. I noticed that your overtime line item, on your initial budget, you added the 212, right? The firefighter suppression line? But your overtime line item stayed the same. Why wouldn't it have been decreased?
Suppression?
No, I'm saying to you that the line where you had the initial, where you requested the additional firefighters?
Yeah, firefighter line.
Yeah, so, but your overtime line went from 116, you increased it. If we're adding 4 firefighters, why wouldn't the overtime line decrease?
The increase that you have reflected before you of $2,500
Yeah.
is a result of contractual obligations with their contractual increase. So the overtime budget increased by $2,500 for the contractual obligation.
Okay, but I'm just saying, we talked about this tonight, if you're adding 4 firefighters, why wouldn't
I
the overtime line
think at this
decrease?
point in time, Chief, and I'll help you out on this, I think, is that you knew that request couldn't be satisfied by the town. I think what Chris is saying is, if you thought that request for the 4 firefighters was going to be accepted, that you would have probably planned down the overtime account as an offset. I'm guessing that's where he's going with that.
The reason that I did not...
There's a conundrum there.
Yeah, no, the reason that I did not do that was because when you look at the 3-year average, there's not a huge difference between what the 3-year average is and what the original request was. And one of the things that I have done every time that I've been here is inevitably, before you're requesting money into overtime, because I don't know how things, it depends on call volume, it depends on, there's a lot of factors. On most years, I'm making a transfer into overtime. So the reason that I did not, I understand what you're saying, but the reason that I did not do it is because the difference between the 3-year average and the request is, the reality is that's potentially 2 weeks of a busy volume.
So is the reality it wouldn't necessarily reduce overtime then?
It may not, because there's other line items that are short, that I wind up relying on that money to use within the budget. So in theory, there would be a reduction in overtime, but that money inevitably is always transferred somewhere else in the budget to create a fixed shortfall.
What we would do, though, in that case is we would have you properly allocate where you think that money should go and not dump it into overtime. One thing Bill Westland told me, he goes, we won't allow any dumps into accounts. Ed won't either. I'm fairly certain you knew you weren't going to get the 4 firefighters initially. You wanted to make sure you protected your overtime line.
And I understand your point about the reallocation. I just, the dollar value on the total budget wouldn't change. It would ultimately, the request would be reallocated somewhere else.
Right, exactly. Kim had a question, Jim? Kim?
Okay, first off, Ed, when did we build the police station?
I think they moved in 2000.
So it's 13 years old.
Approximately.
And old as I know it was built in the 60s?
Headquarters is 51 years old, and West Street is over 60.
Well, my house is 210 years old, and it's perfectly fine because we upgrade it and maintain it, and when the roof needs replacing, we replace it. Those aren't old buildings we're talking about. Police station, fire station. Speaking as a town meeting member and on this board, I can tell you right now, I'm not going to be recommending new public safety buildings, so we damn well better be taking care of these buildings. I don't see any reason why we as a community are not maintaining our buildings. Holes in roofs, and Steve, it's in here, I saw the letter, and I'm not blaming you. We sink money into, we've spent millions of dollars on school buildings, millions. And that's fine, but we need to take care of our municipal buildings too. Our municipal, what you guys have managed to accomplish with your DPW group is fabulous, but I want to see capital rehab in this capital budget. I want to see the requests from the department. If we need to be advocating for more money, because we can't have our buildings falling apart. It's going to cost us more in the long term than to take care of these things all along. I mean, I'm sorry, I know you guys think a 60-year-old building is old, but it's not old. Not in the scheme of, I mean, most of the buildings in this town are probably more than 60 years old. And they're in perfectly fine shape because they get taken care of. Everything isn't brand new. In fact, most of the time when you build a brand new, it's not as good as the old. So I'd like a couple things from the town administration. I'd like a list of the building rehab requests that were submitted by town departments for the budget. I'd like a list of all unexpended capital funds from previous fiscal years for our next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Yep,
I
absolutely.
think if you look at the capital plan, you're going to see requests not only for new fleet vehicles, but there are building modifications and requests as well.
There's nothing in fire, and if he says he asked for it, it's not here.
I think if you look at the CIP request historically by the fire department, the building improvements have not been included. That request was not, in other words, the request put forth by every department is a determination of total capital needs, not just vehicle needs.
Right. Well, that's what, I mean, when I submit a capital budget to the city for the police department, it has equipment, it has rehab for buildings.
And if you look at the police department, it has those requests as well, whether it be carpeting, whether it be windows, whether it be modifications to the boiler or anything of that nature. So those requests are there. It is in your packet, and I'd be happy to provide you a unexpended balance of bond proceeds that have been permanently bonded. We can get that for you at the next meeting.
Yeah, Chris?
I know as the budget season goes on, I see you've got 16,000 in here. I'm gonna be looking for $16,000 to fix a hole in the roof, which is unacceptable. But, is that right? You estimated in your letter 16,000 to fix the roof?
We have been up on the roof, the rubber roof does not appear to be damaged. We can't find anything obvious on the roof. So we're believing that it's somewhere in between, on the inside, in between the roof drain and the ceiling of the station.
Yeah, that, just as the season goes on, if we can, great. If we can't, that's fine too, but we should make an attempt at it. And it's 16,000, so thank you.
Fine. Jim?
Just a basic informational question. I know that the master plan committee is working on the middle school and consolidation of schools was probably the next phase, and this phase after that is kind of talking about West Street, the fire station administration building. Have they approached you in discussions about any of that? Because I think that I don't know if they've gotten that far, but I know there has been talk about the administration building, and if anything happens with the administration building, something's going to happen with West Street Fire Station also. So I just hope that the fire department is involved in those talks, and because worked very hard to get that station up and running and have it staffed. I would just hate to have planning going on without you guys involved. So I hope that's going to occur at some point.
And that's part of what's being coordinated, I think, between I'll call it the municipal side and the school side, which in this case, this is where they've got to meet at least. We actually have a municipal department and the school department in one building. I just think we haven't gotten to that point yet, and...
There's been some talks, just not...
Right.
I know it's probably
Yeah,
phase two.
and some of it's, some of it's process also. There's some, that would turn into some much bigger discussions depending on where the town wanted to direct its resources at that point in time. I'm sure the chief will be involved, certainly town administration. So I think another thing we've got to keep in mind is if I'm reading the CIP as the years go out, that's kind of what's been approved for those years, and now those numbers move around. But I think if Chief Coleman had put in a repair of, say, $20,000 for the roof in 2016, but it didn't make it in this pass for whatever reason, there's really no way to display it on that particular matrix. It's just something that would be in all the detail that he has provided us. So the matrix itself does not lend itself to future needs plugged into a certain year by a department head. But we'll keep this front and center. And Chief, how recent in terms of this, I'll say the water the leakage issue going on with West Street.
Developed last year wasn't as bad as this year.
What's going on with just the tough ones on it?
Last year when
Yeah.
it started,
Yep.
Joe Baby, in the schools, we went out, we inspected the roof, there was nothing really visible, then it sort of stopped. This year,
Okay.
with the amount of snow and everything we've had, it's certainly been.
Okay. So, yeah, and I assumed it was active, that Joe would be part of that, given the shared space on it. So, Kim, to the point about keeping up all the buildings in town, and obviously that's less expensive than new buildings, this, I hope, is a unique problem and something that we can address in a matter of weeks or months versus waiting for something that gets slotted out and capital spending on it. Obviously, it's only going to get worse. You know, I guess in the meantime, you might want to flip the boat over, so I'm not going there. That's just unfair. Too much logic. Any other questions? All right. We have a budget request before us for the fire administration suppression and prevention of $2,605,004 versus a department request of $2,820,579 and last year's appropriation of $2,435,257. Do we have a motion on this?
Motion.
Second.
Question? Comment?
I'm not in favor of approving this budget at this time. I would personally like to hold this budget. I think it needs some attention, and I
Okay.
would just as soon.
You can always reopen it, I suppose.
And we can reopen it, Kim, but, no, that's, points made. But we do have a motion. And do we have a second on
Second.
this? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
I'm sorry.
Just to accept the budget. So you're opposed to accept it at this point in time, so one opposed? And once again, Kim, we've
That's
said
fine.
right along, we,
I'm not opposed to the, I'd like to still look at this a little more.
all right. Okay, now that we've got the operating budget set, let's move to the capital plan for the fire department. Now, Chief, I know I'm going to simplify this and say most of this is leases and replacements and that kind of thing on it. Can you just give us a little simplified on what we're looking to approve here at this point in time? Sure.
That is correct. This year's capital involves the lease payment of current vehicles that we already have, total of five vehicles lease payment. Some of them in their last year, one in their last year, one in the first, one in the second, various stages of the largest request, which you're all aware of, was last year. I came before the finance committee seeking to transfer, to make some repairs on our tower truck, Tower 1. We spent a little over $50,000 making some safety-related repairs underneath the truck, repairing some rod issues on much of the safety bracing for the truck. A year ago, I did show you all some photographs of those repairs. At that time, in conversations with the dealer, some other issues with the truck were pointed out in terms of the rusting issues on the truck. The frame rails on the vehicles do have severe rusting, and the frame rails, when you look at the rails, there's a gap that runs along the rail. It's supposed to be an even space, and I don't know exactly what the distance is, but the frame rails are showing signs that they're actually spreading because of the amount of rust that's inside the frame rails, basically pushing the rail out. And at some point, we're going to blow one of those rails. The dealer, of course, is not going to guarantee when that will be. They said it may be next year, it could be 3 years. The truck is 18 years old, but it was put in service in 1995. It was been on the capital for many years to be replaced in 20 years. At some point within the capital, again, as things move around, the truck had been pushed off a couple of years. But I had asked last year, the Finance Committee had addressed this as well, that because of the length of time in order to build this project, we would order the vehicle so we wouldn't see it in town at all. So again, the vehicle is 18 years old, it's coming up on 19. So I'm, basically, we fit it into the capital to get it back on the replacement for 20 years, which is where it was intended, the service. So if approved, from the time we place the order and receive the truck will be 20 years. We had many conversations with the dealer in terms of frame rail issues with the truck, and the reality is one of the frame rails the truck will need to be, it could be repaired. So I say that up front. It could be repaired. Fortunately, the value in which it's going to cost for this repair isn't much of a difference than what the request is for the replacement. Frame rails, when those are replaced, that's considered a Class 1, what's called a Class 1 refurb. And when a Class 1 refurb is triggered, it means that that truck has to be updated to the current NFPA compliance of new vehicles that are coming off the line. So the factory, the Sutphen factory in Ohio estimates that it would be mid to high $600,000 if the frame rails were to go and be replaced. We are still looking at a little over $650,000 to fix the existing 20-year-old truck. I did research, and it was always my intent to look at possibly remounting the existing ladder onto a new cabin chassis. We did get some estimates in on what that was going to cost. That was a little over $800,000 for the remount. So about 150 shy of what a new truck is going to cost. What I would like to say to the Finance Committee is that I have worked very hard to keep this truck under $1 million. I know $950,000 is a lot of money. It is absolutely a lot of money. What I will tell you is that when you look around the area, in the last 5 years, fire departments have replaced their aerial equipment. All of them have spent over $1 million on their trucks. And that was 5 years ago. So I'm extremely proud of the fact that I was able to keep this truck under $1 million. That was my goal from the beginning. I told the salesman from day one, do not even walk into my office if you have a piece of paper in your hand that says over $1 million. So I've worked very hard to look at the truck that we're going to get. We've made some modifications on things that we have on our existing truck that will not necessarily be on this truck, kind of trying to keep the cost down. So what I can tell you is that I'm very proud of the fact, I'm very proud of the fact that it is under $1 million because it is not again community around us in the last 5 years have spent less than $1 million.
Great, thanks, Chief. I'm going to just ask a quick question. It's a pretty stupid one. What kind of warranty are we getting on this truck?
The warranties,
Where's that truck?
Again, it all has to do with the components of it. So, and I know paint isn't a big deal, but they vary anywhere from 5 years to 10 years, depending on the components on the truck. So typically, the motor is covered for 5 years, transmission parts are covered for 5 years, that's pretty standard. Paint is covered 10 to 12 for type of cost. Typically, industry standard, you're looking at 5 years on the components.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Chris?
If to pay for something like that, it's a 2-year plan? Is that what I'm reading, I just looked at here?
6 years.
Was it 6 years? Why not push it out? Why not make it out so it's, instead of taking out of stabilization or something like that? What other options do we have to pay for a truck like that?
I did provide the CFO with a couple of funding options, anywhere from 6, I believe, 7, and a 10-year.
Ed, you want to?
Yeah, I think when we made our presentation, certainly we're trying to limit the amount of money that we are covering over the lease period to minimize the interest that we have to pay on the remaining balance of that acquisition. So it makes sense to put as much as we can down up front and finance as little as we can, especially given the favorable rates. So it made sense, we talked about this. We have a stabilization of about $2.3 million. I think the item was raised at the last annual town meeting. What does the town plan on doing with its stabilization money? Does it make sense to just keep increasing it if we don't have a purpose for it? Well, clearly we have a purpose for it. Situations like this, we would recommend a one-time withdrawal of the stabilization. Ultimately, that saves the taxpayers of this community money. It saves us in borrowing costs because we're not borrowing as much as we need. We could finance the entire amount over a 10-year period if we wanted to. That would be $1 million at a minimum of $100,000 per year, not including interest. So in the front years of that lease purchase, you're going to be paying an exorbitant amount of interest because you're paying interest on $1 million right up front. It doesn't make sense to do that.
We're leasing the truck, we're not buying it, is that what we're
It's a
saying?
lease purchase.
Oh, it's a
Lease
lease.
purchase.
Oh, okay.
So that's why going in, we said 450, we would look at our financing options at roughly 5 to 7 years, see what makes sense, given the interest rate we would get at the time we're going to purchase the vehicle. So we put a 6-year value in here of about $85,000 per year. We're not locked into that, but it's certainly something provided for in the plan right now.
And I had actually asked the CFO, actually this CFO, not that CFO, this CFO, if we could do more than 450, and then I asked him the same question again, and the third time he said, still no, 450 is what we should max put down on this, so we're not chunking into the stabilization fund too much. Kim?
And if we could look at the school department rehab, capital rehab, there's a $30,000 line item there for Julia Bancroft School that they're talking about closing. What's that for? It's recommended by manager.
Yeah, I want to say that was for underground storage tank. That can't be ignored. That was my recollection. It was tied into that. So even though the school is slated to be closed, I think we have, and that's something we can't ignore. And I think
that particular
Joe
item.
made a public comment on that, actually, when there was that joint meeting. I said
Yes.
there were certain things in the capital that had to remain, even though the schools were closing.
Right.
That was one of them.
Right. Right. Now, let's be clear on this, and to our
I'm just
other
looking for
CFO.
$20,000.
Yeah, no, I understand where you're going on this. What we're going to do is we are reviewing your CIP. We're not going to vote on the CIP tonight. We're not going to vote on a piece of the CIP tonight. But I will promise to all the department heads through both of our CFOs, is that if we are making a change to the CIP, if we decide to recommend a change, that department head will be in attendance to discuss it with us. All right, so we're not going to we're not going to take a vote on the CIP tonight, but tonight was a good night for you to kind of, give us a heads up on anything unusual and new with this, and obviously the tower truck is front and center. Chief?
Mr. Chairman, just to the point of 450 out of the stabilization, with 450 out of the stabilization with what the lease purchase remains, with what the value would be of 85 for 6 years, that's consistent with what we typically would pay for a lease for a fire engine, a rescue truck, something of that size. So that lease payment is not an unusual amount either. That's very consistent with what we do for our lease.
Well, my point on that is, and like everything in the out years on this, it's cheaper to pay for it now versus paying interest on the bond later. And that's just a blanket statement. It doesn't make us smarter to do things that way, but I'll be questioning that right through the CIP. That's the only reason why I went to that discussion. Kim?
I'm going to make a motion that we request the town administration to come back to us with a funding source recommendation that would provide $20,000 for fire department rehab for West Street.
Before I take a second on that, let's just be...
I'm not
I
saying
know, I
we
know.
vote on it,
Yeah,
I
I
just
know.
want a recommendation
And I
on how we
appreciate
could
that.
do that.
And as we're talking about it, because we're all very concerned about that, is $20,000 a correct number for taking care of that problem, or is that a best estimate?
That's an estimate.
Yeah, okay, so just so we're clear, it could be 10, it could be 30 to repair correctly.
And like I said, and I'll point out again, you have the letter that I have in front of you, there's numerous repairs that need to be made. One of the other concerns that we have is, again, like I mentioned, the apparatus sits on what was a cafeteria floor. So there's no drainage in the floor. So when the trucks back in, especially during this time of year, when the trucks back in, all of the snow, the water, all of that runoff pools on the floor, and there's nowhere for it to go. So ultimately, what ends up happening is we pop the bay doors a little bit, guys get the squeegees out, and they start squeegeeing water out from the door, which unfortunately creates hazardous icing conditions in the front of the station. The front of the station is solid ice. So we have drainage issues as well, and I believe I provided an estimate as well. Essentially, what needs to happen is, what the recommendation is, we had a contractor come and look at it, is to cut a hole in the middle bay, it's a 3-bay station, cut a large strip in the floor to provide adequate drainage to the outside, so at least there's a place that we can, the water can go
Collect.
on the inside.
Okay. Yeah, we understand that's makeshift, which is just something we've had to live with, and you creating a skylight in there now just wasn't a good idea, I guess, so we've got to fix that too. Kim, back to your request, if you could give that to us one more time.
Okay, I request that the town administration look for a funding mechanism for a $20,000 building rehab item in the fire department capital, and bring a recommendation to us of where we could find $20,000, how we could possibly fund that.
And I'd assume that's within this budget process. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, one
Yeah.
comment, and I don't have a problem with the request. And like any other budget, I just want to remind the Finance Committee, we're taxing at 170 of 2.5. And I know the Finance Committee has made it clear in prior year budgets that it has the authority to exceed the recommendation of town administration. We're at 170. Clearly, this is a one-time capital expense. It would not permanently be part of 2.5. So the board could consider going above 1.70 for a need such as this, if it so desires. Now, in terms of capital, while we're discussing capital in general, and I know you've been part of the discussions we had with Moody's and some of the comments and some of the dialogue we had with our rating analyst, it's important that we live within a level of debt that is acceptable by our rating agency. Our debt ratio has been escalating for the past 5 years. Very important that we get that under control. So priority does become important in terms of the requests made by the departments. What's important to your department? If we don't live within that debt ratio, it's going to escalate, and it's going to be detrimental to at least our efforts in getting a bond rating upgrade. So we knew this is something that we had to control. We know this is something through the financial policies that we are earmarking a portion of tax levy every year to ease the burden on bond proceeds to fund our capital expenditures. And if you look at the capital plan going out 5 years, you're going to see the level of debt decreasing. We made a commitment to the schools some time ago that they do some major capital improvements to all of their infrastructure. They identified a need. We try to address that need over the last 5 years. As a result of that, you're going to see the debt now falling off. So I just want to make those comments because it is an important piece of what we're trying to do in terms of our long-term financial plan, in containing costs, in controlling that debt ratio.
Okay, Jim and then Chris?
Just one question. When I think about the roof leaking, I'm not really looking at next year. I'm almost thinking that it's something that should be done in this fiscal year. So I guess my question is there any, I mean, you talk about there was one firefighter line item that is an unfilled position. I don't know if there's somewhere where we could take money out of something on that idea, or if there's some money in anything else to do it this fiscal year, not wait until next year. I just hate to put this off when we know it's an issue that needs to be done right away.
Yeah, I think the cost, and course, the chief has given you his best estimate. Certainly, it's hidden, the amount of damage is unknown. How much of that can be handled by our own
That was the other
facilities
question.
management that can help control that cost? I don't think they've had an opportunity to look at it, to the best of my knowledge. You know, whether the weather has to be such, they have to wait until spring to get up there and take a look at it, I don't know. But certainly, I think that needs to be explored as well.
I mean, should that be put in the form of a motion to have this?
It's in Kim.
You can,
No, I'm more concerned about getting it this fiscal year than looking at next year. I don't,
That does not have to be made in the form of a motion. We will ask the chief to take a look at that in conjunction with DPW to determine the
let's try and nail
the
an
extent of the
estimate.
damage and the cost of the repairs.
That's really all I want to get at, because I think it's,
Actually, I think,
I hate to put something like that off.
Greg, Phil Sitchin? Chris?
So what's causing our debt service to increase, Ed? What's been the key cause behind this? Why has our debt been rising so fast? Is it schools? Is it what? What's?
Well, I think if you look at the level of debt supported primarily for schools, it's roughly at about 1.2. It has been. If you look at the last 5 years, the level of debt used to support the schools in previous years was about $450,000. That's about an $800,000 increase. So $800,000 of additional debt annually is going towards the schools. Point well taken by Ms. Holstrom. We can't ignore our public facilities. That's something we had to address. That's something we were focused on. That was something we're committed to. Now that that investment has been made, those capital improvements have been made, that's starting to taper off now. But that holds true for all of our public buildings, and it's something that I think the town manager has emphasized as a priority, that we need to look at all of our public buildings, and that's something that we're committed to doing.
I'm gonna second Kim's request, but, you know, as the budget process goes on and things shake out, you know, toward the end, you know, there's opportunities to find, that could be part of your recommendation, however it could be, but I second Kim's request.
Yeah. Now, I had asked Kim whether this would be within the budget process. I was merely mentioning the time period of the budget process. This just gives a little more credence to Jim's very good point that if we can find the funds to do it in the next month or two, let's do it. I know
the
you,
recommendation is for funding it this year or funding it next year. I just want to have a recommendation for where we can find the money to take care of
totally
this.
agree. Which means that it's got to be done in the next 6 weeks or so, and that would be our
No,
budget
if it
process.
can't be
Before
taken
town
care of
meeting?
this year, then I'd like to know how we can take care of it.
Right.
July 1,
Okay,
which is not that far away.
I understand. Ann, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. The first as to the roof, I mean, that would certainly seem to be an unexpected and unforeseen expense. I don't understand why we couldn't take some money from the reserve fund. That's the purpose of the reserve fund. I know that our snow and ice accounts have been depleted, and we're spending more than we have in those accounts. But we really have, and we can get those squared away at the end of the fiscal year, and even going into August. when we see how our receipts, local receipts come out, and see what happens in the other departments. So snow and ice can be taken care of later, and I don't see why we couldn't do something transfer from the reserve fund, because certainly it's unexpected, and we shouldn't have to wait till the summer. We should, get up there as soon as the weather's good. My second question is regarding the debt ratio. So when Moody's looks at our debt ratio, they're not just looking at the debt we've been taking on for our capital expenses. They're also looking at the debt our town has taken on for the schools and the buildings, correct? Okay. Does Moody's differentiate between the debt that we have for our capital items versus the debt we take on outside the levy limit for facilities?
Yeah, they do take that into consideration, because they know that was done by basically a mandate, a vote of the people, to raise it outside. So they look at our level of debt, they look at the maturity dates, when it's being paid off, what debt we're assuming, and they take a percentage of what that is to our total operating budget. They've noted that it's been rising, but it's manageable.
Yeah.
When they see it rising, there's a tendency to say that this is starting to get out of control. So they want to see a plan in place, they want to see cost containment, and they want to see a level of debt that can be supported annually through its general fund operating revenues.
One more thing, sir.
Sure.
I don't know, my feeling on the motion is I don't think that we need to vote on this, and we can ask the town manager to do this without making a vote. So, I will oppose the motion. Not that I don't want to see the information, but I don't think we need to put it in the form of a motion.
Let's face it, what we're trying to do is keep one of our CFO's feet to the fire on this. And that's really what we're trying to do on here. I'm certainly of the opinion, along with Jim, that we should be able to, from a facilities perspective, take care of this within the current budget, even though we've got some stress because our DPW chief can't let it stop snowing out there. Do something, will you, Bill?
Turn it off, please.
Yeah, I don't believe that Kim's motion is out of line. She's basically saying, look, we need some decisions made on this with some funding sources for town administration to find in the next several weeks. So I think letting at least that motion carry to a vote on this, I believe that the CFO's got a pretty good idea of where the Finance Committee stands in terms of taking care of addressing this issue very much sooner rather than later. So if you want to vote against it, that's fine. I will let the request. Do we have a second on that yet?
I second it.
We have a second, okay. And the motion would be to have the CFO come up with a funding mechanism sometime in the next few to several weeks to address this specific issue, assuming a $20,000 recommendation on that, on how to fund it. So we have a motion and we have a second. Any further comments? Ed, anything?
I want to vote no as well, because I think we could probably just handle it.
We're just following procedure, isn't this?
Okay, no, that's fine. All right, so we have motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. And opposed?
No.
So we have two opposed. Okay. So I think we've certainly, anyways, made our point clear to the CFO. We'd like to make sure this gets addressed sooner rather than later. Now, can you even get up on the roof at this time of year, or are you still, safety-wise, a little bit away from being able to get up there?
The snow is pretty much, there's only a couple inches.
Yeah, okay. I've got a 60-year-old rubber roof on one of my many houses in town here that seems to have held up fine over the years, but,
I don't believe the problem is actually with the rubber roof on it.
Yeah.
I think it's an internal.
something internal. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, and just a reminder, the last thing we need is an IOD case, so make sure it's safe before anyone goes up on the
Yeah,
roof.
I believe that was underlining that somehow, wasn't it, you know? Chief, let's make sure that
Have
tower
the
truck
ladder
is
truck
not
take
used
them
for the...
out.
yeah,
Ladder truck.
yeah, no, let's borrow the helicopter first and take a visual that way.
Mr. Chairman, just to reiterate what I had said earlier, I'm not prepared to do it at this moment. I would really rather get into May, just to kind of get a better handle on the next couple of months' worth of budget. But like I mentioned earlier, I anticipate that I will be back before the committee at some point. You had suggested transfers between the building maintenance line and the equipment repair line to tackle the multiple issues that we have on there. So that was my intention. I had stated that earlier. So I'm confident that I will have some money within my existing budget to direct towards facilities. That has been my intention. To what extent and to what dollar, again, depending on how much these things actually come in, I don't know. It is my intent to take care of some of these building-related issues as I have done in the past within the operating budget. I'm not going to do that.
We welcome your spring visit every year. Thanks.
Kevin, one quick
Ed,
question.
go ahead.
Chief, just a real quick question on the floor drains. I know the building sits on the aquifer, so I don't know if we could just check with Nick in terms of what's allowed.
And I would agree that I think that is going to be problematic. I don't think
Okay.
it's as easy as I had outlined.
Good point, Ed. Very good point. Okay, Chief, once again, we appreciate both the presentations on this, and we'll certainly be keeping in touch with you on that, and as soon as transfers are necessary, you know how to reach out to make sure those things are done expeditiously, okay? Thank you, Chief. Good to see you tonight. Safe driving and, the snow that the DPW chief can't stop. Okay, our next department for review is Department of Public Works. Chief Coyle is here. Bill, thanks for coming up. Along with Deputy Mitchell, who just walked out. Coming back, I hope. He's got a transfer. So, Bill, if you could give us an overview of your budget, some expectations, maybe some things that didn't quite get satisfied at this point in time.
In general, I think for the most part, we tried to level fund the majority of our items. There was some items where some of the numbers decreased, and in other areas where we had some increases due to some of the department plans. In terms of items that were not funded, I think that we had additional funding requests for tree removal. What we've got is certainly we have trees that are dead. We've got some way of removing that tree. We've exhausted our funding. We're looking at other sources, whether or not it's through the roadway account. If it's a hazard and it has to be taken down, ways to get that tree down. I believe in the past we've looked for additional funding for the monitoring as well, to run somewhere on the order of 20,000. We're okay for this year for monitoring. That's something I think in the future years we're going to have to look at. It should probably be a line item in the budget. That's about $20,000 per year for the groundwater and gas monitoring. Other than that, we did not request any additional staff. I think that we've been holding our own with the staff that we have, even with the creation of the facilities and fleet maintenance divisions. No additional requests at this time for staffing as well. There was a change in the, I'll point out, the stormwater budget. You'll see that we've eliminated the line item reporting, and what we've done is we've increased the assistant engineers' hours to do this work, and we felt that rather than paying $2,500, we've had a consultant do this work in the past, rather than paying a consultant $2,500 per year to do this, we feel confident that we can do this work in-house, and that's allowed us over the past to increase the assistant town engineer's hours. We went from, we had an additional 2.5 hours. So we'll fund that addition, and again, it's something we can do in-house. Other than that, I'll be happy to answer any specific questions that you may have.
Okay, great, thanks, Bill, and there's several departments here. We've got engineer, stormwater, highway, we've got facility management, fleet maintenance, recreation, and you get everything but a weatherman on here, so what the hell's going on? I'll open this up to questions. Chris first, then Kim.
I'm looking for the line, I see this coming, a potential issue this year, the number of potholes in town, I see them everywhere. What line item, where's that addressed? Is it asphalt? I saw asphalt, mat, is that maintenance?
Yeah, we have, there's several different areas we can take that, I mean, it goes in that highway budget.
So I'm just anticipating it being worse this year than in years past.
It really hasn't been, I would say, worse this year for us. I think that it's come upon us a little earlier. But I believe the asphalt material is $2,000. So typically we drop on that line item. If by chance that were to fall short, we would then tap into the roadway reconstruction line item and purchase the asphalt.
So you anticipate this being, to be able to, I just see holes
Yeah, can I cut in on that? Oh, excuse me. Last time this happened, I walked out of town meeting. That worked out pretty well for me. The state roads, 12 and 20, whose responsibility for the potholes? That's where I'm seeing the biggest potholes is state.
Highway, that's DOT.
DOT.
Well, I can tell you what we've tried to do to minimize the frequency of the reoccurrence of the potholes. We have a hot box, which goes on the back of our pickup truck, or one of our trucks, and that keeps the asphalt warm. So we try not to use a cold patch. If you throw a cold patch in a hole, and if you get a freeze-thaw cycle, or if it rains out, it tends to pop out again.
Right.
So we've tried to use hot asphalt in most cases. There have been times when we felt that there were so many potholes out there with the recent thaw cycle that occurred, and we had to use cold patch, and we sent 3 crews out, and there's only 1 crew with a hot box. Unfortunately, as those reoccur, we'll go back out and fix them, but our goal would be to fix those with hot top again. So we try to minimize the cost by going out there with hot top. There are asphalt plants that are open throughout the year, and so you want to ride, not, very often. We have to drive an hour to get the asphalt, 45 minutes, but it's well worth the trip. Fix it once and I have to come back.
Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, I just, for some odd reason, I felt like there's a lot more this year than normal, maybe because of the snow, but I was wondering if that needed to be adjusted at all.
No, typically, from what I'm seeing, a lot of it is in roads that we're going to be reconstructing this year. Woodbury Street by the Farmer's Daughter out to Midway, a lot of potholes there, that's going to be pulverized in the spring. Hampton Street, from the city line out to Elmwood, a lot of potholes in that area, that's going to be pulverized this year. We have West Street, tend to be out there quite frequently as well. That some work will probably occur out there this year, but probably potentially later this year, but more likely 2015, with the school project, and then we would extend beyond that. So a lot of the roads where we do see potholes, over by the fire station on Auburn Street, we have a request in for, I believe it's a $2 million project from Mass DOT to rehabilitate from Wall to Central Square, which would include replacement of the traffic signals, sidewalks, and roadway. We're hoping for a favorable vote from the Department of Youth Committee in April for that project from Mass DOT. So that's another one, although that's probably more long-term. So a lot of the roads where we do see the frequency of the potholes reoccurring, hopefully they'll be constructed this year, quite a few of the main streets that we have.
One more question.
Sure, Chris.
I don't see it in here. What is your road reconstruction plan for this fiscal year, or the one coming up?
Yeah, it wouldn't be in here. We started, that went out to bid back in August, September, and we worked on a portion of it, given the time of the year. We did George Street, A Street, Small Wood, second of Rochelle Street. Next year, we have, starting in the spring, we'll have Anthony Street, again from Elmwood to the city line. We have Millbury Street from up in the area of the Fountain's Daughter of the bank, Sovereign Bank, to the Millbury line. The neighborhood of, I believe it's, we'll get the right street, Idlewood or Maria. Inwood too, I don't want to confuse them, get people excited. Idlewood and Maria, that entire neighborhood
Yeah.
is going to be reconstructed, and I'm going by memory, because I wasn't expecting to rattle all these off today, but I think that's the majority of what's happening this year. That's already been bid. As soon as the weather breaks, we'll stop walking the streets again. We evaluate every road in town. We have a rating system of every road in town, and we're actually trying to look at developing a plan, a 20-year plan currently on when all our roads would be done. I have what roads have been reconstructed or resurfaced since 1996. We did this with our fleet maintenance as well. We went back 20 years, and then we went ahead 20 years. So, so we're in the process of looking at that now, so that we can keep roads in a cycle. So that's something we've just started in the past few weeks. It's going to be a pretty significant undertaking, and we'll find out where we are eventually in terms of what that cost is going to be. But certainly the town has gone a long way in terms of adding funds to help us get caught up on a lot of the roads.
Kim?
Bill, can you just give us a really brief synopsis of the projects that your facility management division and your fleet management division have tackled since their inception, just so people know?
The first major project that we started was the construction of the press box at the high school. That was supposed to be completed sometime around August, September, and I believe the school had gone out and bid somewhere around $140,000. I don't have the exact number of what the savings was, but I know it was significant having our own facilities staff do the work. They did about 90% of the work, also paid back well the students. That was one major project. The rehabilitation of our salt shed was a major undertaking. I think it's what it looked like before compared to what it looks like today. To have that done by a private contractor, I'm sure would have been in excess of $100,000. We've done work for, I believe, 3 of the schools back in the past year on some of the new entrances to make them safer, so that there's more of a public safety aspect of the entrance, so that people can't just go into the schools. We've also constructed some interior walls for the schools, for office space. We've done work within our own building, rehabilitating the interior of the highway department, worked with the sewer department. We've done work at the police station, painting the cells. Again, a significant number of projects we've done. And in the near future, I know we're also doing work at the fire station, at the main station. In terms of work that's been done by outside contractors to the town building, the entire roof of the library was replaced last year. That was late fall, and it happened very quickly. I'm not sure if anyone even noticed it. It was very quick. And because we were fighting the winter months, and they had significant leaks at the library. I believe that contract was about $144,000. That's a rubber roof, so it's a specialized item, same as the highway department rubber roof that was replaced this year, and that was in the order of $15,000 to $20,000. Again, a specialized item. The facilities department will be doing some work with the town hall, painting the planning board, conference room, and talking also about looking at doing additional work on the town hall over here. There was some public safety issues relative to inspections that were done within the facility that needed immediate action, with the walls being constructed downstairs on the boiler room that were taken care of by facilities. And there's many other projects too that they've done that maybe a week here or 2 weeks here. In the initial creation of facilities, we thought maybe they would spend 50% of their time. I can tell you that two individuals have done 100% of their time. And they've done some major projects, and there's a lot more work ahead of them, and a lot of progress too. So, in terms of fleet, a lot of that savings has been on a lot of the labor in terms of maintaining the police vehicles, fire vehicles. In terms of the DPW vehicles, we always did most of our own work anyhow, so we didn't realize as much of a savings because we've always maintained our own equipment. So we're seeing the larger savings is within the police and fire line items.
As we saw some of that, looking at the fire budget. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks. I just wanted, like, people
Yeah, that's
who
important.
watch.
They did do some siding too on the fire station as well. The second level, they sided that, vinyl siding, this past summer.
Jim?
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask a question about strategies going in next year. I know this winter has just been totally unexpected, shortage of treated salt, and because of that, now we're having to pay, 2 and 3 times more for salt than we normally would. Is there any strategies that, I know it's like a consortium?
Yes, we have a bid that through the town of Oxford. There's probably 12 communities. I can tell you my own strategy is going to be, we had a shortage this year in the entire region, the entire United States.
Yeah.
Once that bid is awarded, I'm going to pull all the sand and salt mix out of my salt shed, probably just cover that, it's mostly sand, and put as much salt in there for the beginning of the year. And in the past, we've had salt on one side and the sand salt mix on the other. We try to minimize the amount of sand salt mix. So we'll probably get about 1,800 tons of salt in that shed, and then for a snow event, just fill it right back up. I think the problem we ran into is in years past, we could call order salt within a day or two it was there. This year, two weeks out, 3 weeks out, we're still waiting. And in the meantime, our shed is depleting of material. So I think staying on top of that, filling that shed up as much as possible at the beginning of the year, maybe even look at stockpiling it in an alternative location for backup. We have the garage at the landfill. I thought about maybe stockpiling some material there so that I have enough for the entire year already, and the year hasn't even started yet. So we are looking into that.
Now, how does that bid go? Now, you have a bunch of towns that go in on this, and they get a quoted price. Do you have to use the volume that you actually bid for, or?
There's 3 numbers that you put in. You put in a minimum purchase number, then you put in an anticipated purchase, and a 125% maximum allocation. Going off the top of my head, I know my maximum was 2,500 tons. I believe the anticipated was 2,000, and I would say the minimum was 1,500.
Okay.
So we have to purchase 1,500. I think that probably going to look at nudging those numbers upward, because I think that minimum of 15 is somewhat of a low number. Mm-hmm. I think the average that this town has used has been closer to 1,800 on average, and some instances we've only used 12. So I think if we have a minimum of what we average, if we end the year with some additional salt in the salt shed, then I think we would be in much better shape going into the following year. Currently, up until 2 hours ago, the shed was mostly full. They'd have to send more crew out and get the main hose and the hills because they were getting covered. I was hoping not to have to do that, but
Sure.
we had about $35,000 worth of material in the shed up until today. We probably didn't use a significant amount tonight, maybe $3,000 worth. And so if winter were to finally stop, we would end the winter with having about $30,000 worth of material in the shed. We're running at about around $75,000 deficit. So all in all, considering the winter we've had, and the fact that we've been out about 30 times treating the roads, plowing the roads. It's been a significant burden on the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Not right now. Oh, I do have a question.
Sure.
What about Chapter 90 money? Have you heard anything from the state? I mean, are we going to be funded at the level we were last year? Or will that be increased or decreased?
A couple of things. One is, I think I mentioned before, is that we've gone through multiple roads that the town collects Chapter 90 money on. When we were receiving about $595,000 for Chapter 90, because we found several miles of town roads that weren't being accountable, had documented that they were accepted, sent it to Mass DOT, we now receive about $20,000 annually more. So we're now receiving about, I think it's actually $617,000 per year. There was talk about increasing 50% on what Chapter 90 was going to be. So last year, we actually received a letter saying that our allocation in Chapter 90 would be $900,000. That didn't happen. I think what they were looking for was an increase in the gasoline tax and fuel tax, and a lot of the information out there was that when you increase the fuel tax, it would give you more money in Chapter 90 and fix your roads. Well, they increased the fuel tax, but then the money did not go to the roads. We stayed level funded. Okay. But there's talk again this year. I believe there's been a budget submitted to increase the allocation again by 50%, but it has a number of hurdles before it gets approved, and it has to get past the governor. And last year, I think that's where the roadblock was. It was at the governor's level.
Okay, thank you.
Just a few questions, Bill, and then we'll just go through the approval process here. Under stormwater, you've made a shift between the sediment disposal and the replace pipes and catch basins. Is that a sign of progress regarding keeping up with the sediment? And also, I would assume some of that relating to using less sand on the roads?
Yeah, that's the biggest savings we've been doing with less sand. And even this year, we're with the sand. There's really been a significant reduction. I know when the initial study had been done, the Comprehensive Environmental Incorporated, they're going to put it in the town, based on the amount of sand being deposited, I think at that time it was around 6,000 tons, they were estimating $90,000 per year for sediment disposal. But with the minimal use of the sand, we've been able to constantly, or consistently decrease this number. And what we are finding, though, is the drainage pipes within that town road, we go to reconstruct them, and deteriorated, the rock now along with completely gone. So in many cases, before we pulverize that road, start paving it, we'll replace the drain line. So we're finding there's more of a need to replace the drainage infrastructure, and less of a need for the decrease in the cost of the sediment disposal.
Okay. The de-weeding of ponds, that's gone up quite a bit over the last several years, and I think I asked you this last year. Is it just an increase in expense in keeping up with that program?
Part of the commission permit, what we want to see is maintaining your ponds, maintaining the nuisance aquatic weeds, and one of the ponds that wasn't being treated in the past was still the outdoor. So we've added that portion, so that's an increase. I will say that there's a new product out there that's being utilized that we're going to go out to bid with this year, and our hopes are that this number may decrease fairly significantly. It's not going to be in half, but we may see a 10 to 20% reduction in this number.
Okay, great. Hope that works out. Under the highway division, is that heating fuel line item? That's gone up quite a bit. What's up with that number?
That number had gone up back from FY11, and we have seen number trending downward. But this particular year being so cold, we're finding that it's actually gone up, I believe, since last year. So we maintain that until we see some consistency.
Sure.
It's going up this year, and maybe we'll look to do that, but it's just up a little bit.
As some of the work that you've done on the highway building itself, will that create some heating efficiencies, or?
Not really.
Okay.
We didn't do any insulation type. I mean, they're cinder block. The
Yep.
roof replacement was just a rubber.
Okay. I see that you've planned in there a DEP fine and penalty, is that,
I'll be happy to say that.
it's $800, by the way, so it's a,
Yes.
yeah. So that basically is part of the ongoing,
That was a long time ago.
yeah. I know that. We'll be paying a number on that for
Forever.
forever?
Well, until it meets the quality standards, so.
Okay, so that's, okay. My last question is, this be under the Parks Division. The numbers you have in there for the Pappas Complex for water, electricity, those are just estimates at this point? We really,
I can tell you the water number was pretty accurate.
okay,
The electric, they don't have the actual data for the,
okay.
but we were right on with our water usage.
Okay, and I get, these questions are actually under sewer. I know Jeff's here. The repair line under sewer is planned up quite a bit. And I know we planned it up last year. I've got like 3 or 4 questions, Jeff, so if you wouldn't mind joining us on that, just to address these. Thanks for your time, Jeff. The repair line? Yeah, that's at 58,000, up from 53 last year, and the 3-year average is quite a bit below that.
The main reason for that is we did a rehab of the pump stations. Probably going on 12, 14 years ago, it was a $1.2 million project. We did the equipment that was rehabbed at that point was starting to age. And we are addressing a portion of that each year in our CIP.
Right.
Pump replacements and whatnot. Unfortunately, we can't do them. They were all replaced at the same time. So we can't replace them all again at the same time without going into a capital expenditure. So the addition of the repair line is for rebuilds to get us through until the pumps can be replaced.
Okay. Thank you. I noticed the postage line went up there. Are we going to split billing on?
We've been trying for the past.
I know you've been trying.
I believe this is our 3rd year, and we're this close. We're working with the people from Munis.
You have a software issue,
We've
right?
been very close to this past year's billing, but things just didn't quite work out, so we're already working on it right now in test mode. So we should be ready for a twice-a-year billing.
Okay. And my last question would be the Upper Blackstone, that number is as final as going to be?
That is the number for this year.
Okay, that's fine.
I'll have you know that we are actually went down, our assessment, our flow went down, I should say, 5.5% over last year. Okay, it's based on a 3-year average, so the money we put into the system for the infiltration and inflow removal is starting to show up, which is a good thing. Actually, our percentage of flow is 5.5%, and there's a 9% seeing 90% change reduction, actually. Like I said, it doesn't fully show up. It's a 3-year average, but this year we've recognized a 90% reduction in our assessment.
Good, that's good. That's all I had on sewer. Are there any other questions? All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to read each division within the DPW department, and then we'll go to the totals, and then we'll take a vote on that. So the recommended engineer division is $659,696. Stormwater division, $294,307. The highway division, $949,042. Facility management, $62,500. Fleet maintenance, $162,812. Parks division, $208,447. Recreation, $41,677. Cemetery, $168,920. Sewer division is $1,838,173. This for a total for the DPW department of $4,385,574. This is compared to a fiscal 14 appropriation of $4,307,147. So an increase of approximately $78,000. Do you have a motion on this?
So moved.
Second.
Any other questions, comments? Jim?
I did want to do, made the motion.
Oh, you
I actually
can-
wanted to add $150 to salt and calcium to get snow and ice to an even 300,000 instead of $299. $150.
I'll withdraw my motion.
Well, will that get us?
Motion's withdrawn, and,
I don't know if we just want to take it out of,
Well, we have unobligated of 2,000 and change, so.
so we can just add to the budget,
150,
right?
you know.
All right, so the adjusted amount would be $4,385,724. Get that in my head. No one's going to believe this. Do we have a motion on the adjusted amount?
So moved.
So moved.
Second?
second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So voted. Thank you. So that means the snow and ice will be an even $300,000 at this point in time. Just an easier number to work with as we try to revisit that. Bill, we'd like you to stay, and certainly Jeff also, to just this discussion on the CIP. So if you wouldn't mind coming back up and talking about some of your plans, what's going on, some highlights on that. We're not going to take a vote on it tonight, but we'd like you to be here just if we've got questions. Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, what we've done is we've looked at all our vehicles back 20 years, about 2 years ago, and then we looked at 20 years to try to come up with a replacement cycle at a minimum within 20 years. Some of the large 6-foot dump trucks. Ideally, we'd rather do that on a 10-year replacement cycle, or 9 years, which you get the frames are actually rotting out, and it becomes a hazardous situation to be using those trucks. I think we've made a lot of progress in replacing a lot of the equipment, in the trucks in particular. And we currently still have a couple of trucks that are over 20 years old, but our capital improvement plan, our goal was to get that cycle, I think we're more into about a 15-year cycle with the larger trucks. And the smaller pickup trucks, our goal was to get into a 10-year replacement cycle with those trucks as well. I know some of them that are here that are being replaced, I think more like 12 years, but I think we're getting closer to what our plan would be.
I'm just going to add to that, Bill, that we had actually knocked down, I think, a roadway improvement by $25,000 to move that over to the operating budget. And as long as I'm in this seat, I'll be all over the town CFO to continue to move. To me, it's as close to an operating cost as possible, and I know we're trying to do a trade-off on here, but that's just my opinion on trying to address that, and I think Ed might have a comment on
Yeah,
that.
if I may, Mr. Chairman, and certainly, I think if you look at the CIP plan, there are two items that I want to draw to your attention. One being under DPW, Town Road Improvement. This is the first year that we are funding Town Road Improvement 100% through tax levy. So it's no longer bond proceeds. We could actually put that into the operational side of the budget and add it to the 525 now that we're funding it through tax levy.
Okay.
Reason we left it in the CIP is, although it's identified 100% funded through tax levy, we want to make sure, and because we have that earmark on an annual basis of roughly 1/10 of 2.5%, which represents roughly close to $100,000, we're able to do that. We just want to make sure going forward that we'll be able to support that level of funding annually, in addition to the 525 through tax levy. Secondly, the other line item, although it's not under discussion tonight with DPW, is the police department. All their vehicles are now being purchased through tax levy and no longer a lease purchase. So the 2-year earmark, this is the second year of the tax levy, generated close to $200,000. Those are the two items now that we have funding through tax levy and no longer meeting through our borrowing needs.
Okay, good. Do we have any questions or comments on the CIP? I know, once again, Wayne Bloomquist gets everything he wants in this thing, huh? I don't get what he does, but he must have pictures or something, you know. There being no questions, Jim, go ahead.
Actually, I wanted to make a question. I know we've already voted on the budget, but I had a question on Upper Blackstone. Has there been any timeline for the new assessments, or have they made any decisions on some of the mandates that EPA is coming up with? Okay.
Every year, the same questions come up. I know I've been the mirror of the doom and gloom that we've got the black clouds looming, and it's so, unfortunately, we have not received a compliance schedule yet from EPA. We've appealed, and appealed, and appealed. We've gone as far as we can go, legal, as far as the permit goes. We are bound by the current permit. We are running pilot programs right now that, if these pilot programs work out, I know I've spoken with the committee in the past, we'll be looking at a $200 million upgrade in order to make permit. Like I said, we're running on a smaller scale pilot programs to reach the limits, and the small-scale pilots have been working phenomenal. The numbers have been unbelievable. I don't know how they're getting the numbers within the dry well flow. They've been right on perfect. The kicker is, where the money's going to come into play, is they want the permit to be met through wet weather flow as well. But let's say that they average 40 million gallons a day. Normal flow, dry weather flow, we're making permit every time, no exceeds. It's spring and fall where we go from the 40 up to 100, 110 million gallons a day that they expect us to keep the same levels of nitrogen, basically phosphorus.
Nitrate, yeah.
We haven't got there yet with the pilot program, but we know that we can save on one end and hopefully cut back. They're not sticking their necks out yet and putting any kind of construction estimate because we don't know what the compliance schedule is going to be. And when I said the $200 million, it's not like we're going to get hit in that 1 year. You know what I mean? It's going to be a construction process, the same as what we basically are just finishing up now. We're still paying the debt interest on, the existing upgrade.
How long was that? Was that a 10-year program?
It was close to 10 years, but we felt the heat of that probably within the last 6 to 8 years. And we're probably looking at the same type of borrow a certain amount, do one phase, you know, it'll be
Yeah.
probably 2, 3, 4 phase project, as was the last one.
Any projections from our standpoint, what the yearly assessment would go from to? You know, where would it go to?
Well, I mean, if it was the $200 million, well, let's say in 10 years, we're up to $2 million, it's going to be double, it's going to be double of what we have. As well as...
Sobering.
The rates, you know, the rates to the customers.
Question?
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
And as a question, Ed, do you have a direct comment on that, or?
No, I just want, just a notable that I want to bring to the attention of the Finance Committee relative to Jeff's budget, but I will let Ian
Okay. Yeah?
ask her a question for us.
Hey, you had mentioned that we are seeing, what, about a 9% reduction in the flow to Blackstone because of the work that we've done on the manhole cover project. Could you address that, please, a little more?
Yes, that was the $1.1 million infiltration and inflow home study and removal project, which we're just completing. Actually, we just completed that project as much as the contract allowed. And if you recall, when I presented the project, we were at about a 46% infiltration rate during wet weather. So we would run from an average of about 2 million gallons a day to anywhere from 6 to 9 million during the wet weather. So if we were to pull the 46% out, you know, it's concentrated in that short period of time, but that's substantial money. But we have seen a decrease in the flow within the last 2 years.
Is it possible to put a dollar figure on that?
Yes, but I it was about $2. It was about $2.35 per gallon to remove. And as far as the savings, cost of treatment is, just have to find it. It's $1.80.5 per 1,000 gallons for treatment. So it is substantial. You know, I can't tell you exactly how much we've actually removed, but, you know, the reduction in the assessment, you know, with their budget going up slightly.
Yep.
Right.
And,
They're very fluid.
no, that makes sense. Were we mandated to do that project by the, or we? Okay.
We were under an administrative consent order,
Yeah.
and DEP, being the nice people that they are, they said, what can we put in your consent order to help you out? And I said, well, we need so directly, yes.
All right, thank you.
Ed, you wanted to add something?
If you look at the request and recommendation for the sewer department budget, there is a new line item in there called retained earnings. And we've had many discussions relative to that one item. And we had discussions with DOR as well. From a capital perspective, we recognize the magnitude of the infrastructure related to the operation of the sewer department. I think the infrastructure is tagged with a value of 65 million? 85 million. The system is aged. We recognize that. This is a step in trying to address that. Although it pales in comparison, the total system was worth 85, so we know that at some point, replacement is going to have to take place to certain sections of that system. This $100,000 retained earnings automatically gets put into what we call Jeff's equivalent of the general fund balance. It's called retained earnings. So we're building that up through a one-time increase in user fees to address that. That permanently puts $100,000 in that account every year.
Is Worcester doing a like effort?
I'm not sure, they're getting hit with so many different, or they're under so many different waters, both stormwater as well as the sanitary side.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know what their relationship to us,
Yeah.
what their ratio of, I'm sure they have a retained earnings account,
Yeah.
but ratio-wise, I'm not sure.
When,
So for instance, we had a failure. What was the cost of the failure up at Package Shop most recently?
Yeah, that was, about 250,
$250,000, right?
Yeah.
250,000.
So when situations like that arise, we would have the ability to go to town meeting and appropriate directly out of retained earnings to handle situations such as that.
Okay.
Otherwise, you'd have to get an authorization to borrow, and now you're paying money on...
Right.
Ultimately, we'd like to get the retained earnings somewhere in the $1 billion range, which is still a little bit low compared to what DOR would like to see.
Yeah, we asked DOR what they would suggest in terms of a percentage of budget or infrastructure, and really no guidance, so I guess we decided that, roughly 1.5 million would be adequate to cover.
Actually, during the conversation, we asked if that was a good number, and they more or less blessed it and said, yeah.
Yeah, so our retained earnings certified by DOR for period ending June 30th, 13 was roughly 778. This gets it closer to 900. So we're working in a direction that at least would give us some comfort. A situation like this should arise again.
Is there specific guidelines or events that we could tap into the retained earnings? I mean, is that pretty clear on when that can be used, or when, no, you can't use that money or pile of money?
It's the equivalent of general government appropriating directly out of free cash.
Well, it goes down to my next question. Who makes that decision?
Town meeting ultimately makes a
Town
decision.
meeting.
They would have to vote that. But the recommendation would come from Jeff and town
Okay,
administration.
that's what's going on that. Okay. That's fine. Jeff, thanks for the update.
Another
Jeff?
project that we're starting up too, as far as the infrastructure, the aging infrastructure, we're going through a full system, not an upgrade as of yet, but a plan to evaluate the remainder of the system that was not evaluated through the I&I study. So the other, probably 60% of the system will be evaluated, and there will be a capital plan established for us to canvass certain areas and, make recommendations and priorities as far as capital repair.
Okay, great. And actually, Jeff, if you could stay up with us, we've got, might as well go right to the transfer you've requested, unless there are other comments or questions. Okay. And thanks for the presentation, both you and Bill, on the DPW CIP. We have intradepartmental transfer requests within the sewer division of the DPW from the contingency account, which has a balance of just over $14,000. Amount requested, $12,500 for phones and alarms. The reason for the transfer is to cover the costs of necessary upgrades and programming to the in-track alarm system. Can you give us just a little bit on that, please?
The in-track alarm system is the alarm system that monitors the 12 pump stations. And we've performed some upgrades recently, and since then, we've noticed some other, I don't want to say oversights, but more enhancements that need to be done to go along with the upgrades that we've performed. Some of it, we've noticed that simple things like if we shut a pump off or if the pump is out of service being repaired, it throws the entire sequence off. It throws the levels off, which we get false alarms, which dips into the over, it costs money and overtime and whatnot. So these are programming issues that will be addressed as far as that goes. And also, there'll be another portion as far as the graphics, a better representation for the workers and whatnot, for us to monitor the operation of the system. It'll be shown on a large screen display. And it will also give us in the main pump station the ability to remotely operate the pumps themselves. Because a lot of times we'll get we have the one TV screen in the office now that monitors the entire system. And if we're sitting in the office and let's say we get a high level on for some reason and we look and one pump is running at lost prime or there was a problem with that one pump. But for some reason the other pumps didn't kick on, we don't have the ability right now to just reach over to the computer screen and hit a button and turn a pump. We physically have to drive, down the list of line and turn pumps on. By the time we get there, depending on traffic, we could have multiple ones. Part of this work here will give us the ability to be able to operate the pumps right from the screen. And then that's actually, there's 2 phases of this. There'll be a 3rd phase that'll become possible. If the 3rd phase will require possibly maybe an article on the annual warrant. I'm just getting the prices back now. The 3rd phase would allow us to, the entire system to be internet-based, so that whoever the person is that's on call will actually have a tablet and will be able to do this remotely while he's en route to the station or physically pull up the full condition of the system or the station.
Okay. Any questions on that? Jim?
Just a question, was this done through kind of an internal audit, or was this something found with an outside audit, this alarm system? Is this something that was developed internally?
Yeah, you mean the work we're doing right now? Yeah, we found that as we were using it internally, we found more or less glitches in part of the system that we need to address.
Motion to approve?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So voted. Jeff, thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, that's it for transfers. We will not be meeting next week. I've got a conflict, I think Ed does also. So in 2 weeks, Sharon, who do we have coming?
Police.
Police in 2 weeks?
The youth commission. I'm sorry.
Who else?
The youth commission.
And Youth Commission.
If not schools, then maybe, maybe library or inspection services. We'll fill that.
Okay, yeah, if we can,
So the 19th is our next meeting?
yeah. Okay, anything else, any other comments? I'll make sure I stay on Ed's back regarding our issue with the roof, West Street Fire Station. I'm sure we're going to come up with a reasonable conclusion to that issue. There being nothing else, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Favor? Aye. Opposed, so voted. Thank you.